been talking about Christmas from this perspective of forgiveness, that Christmas is for forgiveness. In week 1, we said, hey, Christmas is for everybody. And everybody can experience forgiveness because Christ came for every single one who would believe and receive. The greatest gift ever, the Son of God, came and paid it all so that if we would reach back out and say, yes, I want Jesus in my life and I accept him, we can start a brand new life. That's awesome. Then last week, we looked at this idea of forgiveness from the vantage point of forgiving those who've hurt us. That's important because if we carry around unforgiveness in our heart, and it's easy to do, we get wounded and then that wound morphs into bitterness, and the next thing you know, we got this little thing and we're carrying it around and we won't let go of it even though we don't even know why we're carrying it anymore sometimes. And it's just making us miserable. To let that go. We talked about that last week, forgiving those who've hurt us. This week, we're going to flip that on its head, and we're going to actually kind of ramp it up to a notch higher, and we're going to talk about initiating forgiveness. Initiating forgiveness with those we've hurt. So we're going to go the other direction here, and we're going to actually ask Jesus to help us search our hearts and draw to mind anyone that we may have hurt. And initiate that forgiveness. And that's a little harder to do sometimes. A matter of fact, I want to do a little experiment to kind of help us think about our mindset on things like this. Now, I don't know if this will work or not, but we'll see, okay? I want you to imagine, or shoot, you don't even have to imagine. How many of you know of someone that borrowed something from you, and we're not going to say they stole it. We're just going to say that it's been 3 years and they still have it. Can anybody think of anyone? Okay, no names, just put your hands up. All right. Got somebody like that in your life? Okay. So now let's flip that. And we're not going to say that you stole it, but it's been 3 years and you still got it. Can you think, or maybe are you that person? Do you have someone in a relationship like that where, oh, dude, I've had this thing forever? It's, what's funny about that dynamic? There's always fewer hands on the second one, right? Or you kind of expect fewer hands. Because it's like, well, my intentions are good. I know I meant the right. I don't know if and we kind of go down this whole road of rationalizing it, and it's just harder. And it's kind of that same dynamic. We know that if someone's hurt us, we're poignantly aware of that, and we can go do business and forgive them. And as hard as that is, that's actually easier than the other of saying, Lord, who have I hurt? And how can I initiate forgiveness? How can I go make this right? But that's exactly what Jesus calls us to do in the passage we're going to look at today. And that's a big part of Christmas. Because Christmas came to proclaim forgiveness in the biggest way possible. And John says, because God first loved us, now we can love each other. And so that's what we want to talk about today. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 through 25, Jesus is teaching here, part of the Sermon on the Mount. And he says, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and I just want to simplify that because we don't often come to an altar today and offer a gift like they would have been in the habit of doing. But let's just imagine we're at church and we're worshiping, okay? If you're in church and you're worshiping, and while you're there, you remember that your brother or your sister has something against you. No, notice it's not you have something against them. Someone has something against you. Leave your gift there in front of the altar first. Go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversaries. When I was serving a church in Indiana, in Mishawaka, we had a young guy in our church who was part of the volunteer fire department. And every time that we would do a kids event outside, especially in the summer, they had this, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a little portable house. It was a little trailer that they had rigged up to look like a house, and they had all kinds of cool equipment in it. And they would simulate a fire, like they could fill the room with smoke, or they could make a door feel hot, or those kind of things. And he would bring it to the events when we were having kids events, and then we'd teach fire safety. They'd let the kids go in there and close the doors and say, now it's going to be dark for a minute, and now, Johnny, go up and put your hand on that door. Oh, see if it's hot. Here's what you do. And they'd teach them how to be safe in a fire. And of course, one of the things they always taught them, you guys know this. I know you know this. was to stop, drop, and exactly. See, we got it. We stop, drop, and roll. Perfect. Okay. Well, today I want to teach us in terms of this approach to forgiveness, seeking out those we may have hurt and initiating forgiveness, we need to stop, drop, and give. Okay? Now, we'll break that down. But this is real important, and maybe we can remember this as well as stop, drop, and roll. If we can, it'll be awesome. Stop, drop, and give. The first step is stop and acknowledge that you've hurt someone, or acknowledge the person or those that you've hurt. That's hard to do sometimes. We have this thing in our human nature that just wants to block that out or rationalize it or say, I didn't really mean to hurt them. Maybe they were just thin-skinned. It's all their fault. That kind of thing. But we need to acknowledge it when we've hurt someone. Matthew chapter 5, verses 22 and 23 and 24. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember, it comes to your mind, that your brother has something against you, leave your gift in front of the altar. Stop. Essentially, Jesus is saying right now, it's okay. If you remember someone that has something against you, we'll say, you don't have to say anything. You can just leave. Because Jesus is saying, look, it's more important for you to go make that relationship right than to go through one more worship service. I want to kind of really drill down on this idea that we need the Lord to do this, because this is against our nature. There's an old saying that says, we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. You ever notice that? We do this all the time. We're not aware of other people's intentions, but we're aware of ours. And when we do the same thing that we maybe would judge someone else for, in our heart we're thinking, yeah, but I meant well. I had good intentions, and I'm going to make that right. We have all that process going on in our own heart that we're aware of our intentions, but we don't see that in other people. And so because of that, it's hard for us to say, well, maybe they got hurt, but I didn't mean anything by it. We need to ask God to say, help me to understand. Help me to be aware when I've hurt someone. Help me, God. Bring those people to my mind. Help me to see it, not in a rationalized way, but in an honest way. If I've hurt someone, Lord, help me to see who those people are. Here's a key question. When you need to deal with this and you approach someone, you need to be able to say, how have I hurt you? Okay, so you've got this person. God's brought him to your mind. And you need to initiate forgiveness. You need to ask, how have I hurt you? Now, here's why that question matters. It kind of eliminates all of your baggage that we all want to kind of tack onto it. We want to justify ourselves. That's our tendency. Because we want to say, well, I'm not really at fault here, am I? I mean, maybe you're partly to blame here too. But really and truly, when we're trying to initiate forgiveness, we just need to come clean of all that, lay our ego down, and just ask the person, how have I hurt you? Truly, we're not always aware. Because think about this. This is I have found this so true in my life. Communication is a weird thing. Okay? When I want to talk to you or you want to talk to me, here's how it happens. There's like 10 parts to communication. I get a thought in my head. And I want to share that thought with you, okay? But it's just a thought. So I formulate it, and it goes through my nerves, and, my diaphragm pushes air up through my vocal cords, and I say words to try to express the idea that I have in my head. And then those words float through the air, and they hit your eardrums. And those vibrations get translated into some kind of signal that your brain picks up, and then that gets filtered through the week that you had, or your experience with the person that's talking to you. Maybe recently they've done something or whatever, and you have this bent opinion toward them or whatever, but all your experiences kind of shape what you're hearing. And the next thing you know, there's what I meant to say, and there's what you heard, and then there's what you actually experienced. See how that can get all twisted around? It's like Alan Greenspan. I love this. He's so right on when he said, I know that you think you understand what you thought that I said, but I'm not sure that you realize that what you heard isn't what I meant. Have you ever felt like that before? In a conversation, it's like, no. You know, those old sayings where it's like, I talk till I'm blue in the face. That's like a common saying, right? It's like, I feel like I keep trying to get this thing communicated, but there's a wall. Something's not getting spoken. You know, our good intentions can be received by others as a really bad experience. I've had people in my life who, they were just trying to help. You ever had anybody in your life, they were just trying to help? You know, and I know that I just thought your kitchen would be arranged better if I just did this. And, you know, you're not mentioning any names or whatever. You know, family can be the best and family can be the hardest. You know, and it's like, well, I just thought that, you know, your office needed a little help. So I just, while you were out grocery shopping, I just fixed it for you. And you're like, you know, honestly, I know maybe you just meant to help, but if that's help, will you please not help anymore? You know? So sometimes we don't even know. We have these great intentions, but it doesn't always impact the person the way we intend it to. And the whole point is, sometimes when we're wanting to initiate forgiveness, we just have to admit that we're clueless sometimes. We don't even know what we said or what we did or why it hurt the person. But you can tell, can't you, when you have a relationship and something's not right. And in those cases, we need to just swallow our ego and say, how did I hurt you? Tell me, because I want to make it right. Okay, so we stop. We acknowledge it. And the second thing we do is we drop. We drop everything to make it right. And worked into this point is an intentionality. We do it on purpose, and we don't kick it down, you know, we don't kick the can down the street. We do it immediately because so many promptings from the Spirit will come, and if you don't act on them, they're gone. And so we need to act immediately on these. Matthew chapter 5, verse 24, Jesus says, leave your gift there in front of the altar. Leave, the word there is like right now. You know, don't wait till the service ends even. Leave your gift at the altar. First, go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Matthew 5:25, the very next verse, Jesus says, settle matters quickly with your adversaries. The word quickly there means without delay. Don't put it on pause. Don't write it down and say, I'll get to it later. Do it right now. Take care of it. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 2 through 5 says, if you have been trapped by what you said, and so much of this hurt comes from words that we speak, you know? And when you've said something, you didn't mean to hurt them, but boy, clearly something you did or said hurt them. There is this sense in which we're in bondage now, because when you care about someone and your relationship's not right, it's hard to have peace. So that's what the proverb writer is getting at here. When you've been trapped by something you've said, then do this to free yourself. Go and humble yourself. And that's a key to this thing. You got to lay your ego down in order to approach someone and say, I get it. I've hurt you. I don't know how, but I want to know how so that I can make this right. Humble yourself. Plea with your neighbor. Allow no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Free yourself. The whole point is take the initiative just to settle the matter and make it right. A little bit of wisdom here. Do this face to face. I know that's hard sometimes, especially when there's, you know, something there that's not right and there's feelings involved. But I'm telling you, face to face is the best way to do this. Please don't do it through a text or an email. And the reason I say it like that is because of experiences I've had. I remember one time, again, in Indiana, I was communicating with somebody through an email, and something wasn't right. I took a left turn when I should have taken a right one or something in the communication, and they wrote back and they were clearly upset. Well, instead of saying, hey, let's get together, I wrote an email back. And I tried to explain, oh, no, I meant this, and da-da-da. Well, apparently that didn't fix it. It made it worse. And they wrote back. And the next thing you know, you can see this thing, right? It's just escalating. It's just getting worse. Well, no. And the next thing you know, it's this huge thing. And I'm just kind of stunned. I'm like, what? What did I do? How did he get here? You writing it doesn't work like that. When you communicate face to face, you can instantly address things. No, that's not what I mean, or let me clarify, or hear my heart, and you can work things out in real time. It's just so much better face to face when you communicate with someone. In Galatians chapter 2, verse 11, Paul is writing about a confrontation he had with Peter. And this isn't specifically about initiating forgiveness, but it shows how important it is to do something face to face. It says when Peter came, the Apostle Peter, came to Antioch, Paul says, I opposed him face to face because he was clearly in the wrong. Paul could have written a letter. Paul wrote a lot of letters. He said, hey, Peter, let me address this thing. You need da-da-da-da. Well, have you ever noticed that when you say something, somebody always wants to say, yeah, but, and say something back? You can't do that with a letter. So face to face, one conversation's worth 1,000 letters, I guess is the best way to say it. So face to face. Another really important little tidbit here is when you initiate forgiveness, you've got this person, you know there's something not right, you've done something, even if you don't know what it is. Say these two things. You can say them in your own words, but you need to say these two things. I'm sorry I have hurt you. That's the first. Don't add to that. Don't, you know what we have a tendency to do sometimes? You'll catch the difference. Well, I'm sorry that if something I did when I was trying to do a nice thing made you mad. That's not an apology, right? I can tell. You get it. You see the difference, right? So you just, in my old Indiana growing up days, you just got to eat crow. Okay, do you understand what I mean by that? You just got to be humble and say, hey, I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. And I don't want to add anything to that. I just want you to know that I'm really sorry that I did that. The next thing is, will you forgive me? And that changes everything. It's like I'm not rationalizing. I'm not making any excuses. I get it. I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And that brings things to a point where now the ball isn't in your court. It's in theirs. And it's not like you're trying to manipulate things. You're just saying, I'm clearly was in the wrong. I'm sorry. And will you forgive me? I've never thought of Dr. Phil as a great theologian or whatever, but sometimes he says some really smart things. And he said something that speaks to this point. He said, problems can be really complex, but solutions are usually really simple. In other words, a really sincere conversation where you sit down with somebody that you've hurt. Maybe there's been angst for decades. And if that person were to go to a counselor, they could talk for a half hour about all the things all the issues they've had with you or whatever. But you sit down with them and in one moment say a sincere, I'm sorry I hurt you. Will you forgive me? If they reciprocate and say, yes, I forgive you. That's a pretty simple thing, but boy, that can wipe out a decade of problems. Now, you still got to rebuild some things, right? It's not like it makes everything go away. But see how that can just bring so many things back to where they need to be? Another really important little tidbit here is, do your part and let God take care of the rest. Trust God to take care of the rest. Don't feel like you need to offer the apology and help them forgive you too. Okay? Maybe you don't have an issue with that. Some people kind of feel like they need to control the whole thing. Okay? Don't feel that. Just you do your part. I'm sorry that I hurt you. Will you forgive me? And then trust God to take care of the rest. Hopefully that person will forgive you. Hopefully that person will say, absolutely, I forgive you. And you can walk on or begin to rebuild whatever you need to rebuild. But leave it there. Leave it with God at that point. Romans chapter 12, verse 18, Paul says, if it's possible. I'm glad he said that. Because sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes that person's bitterness has overwhelmed them and they just won't even sit down and talk. Sometimes they're gone. Maybe they've passed on or whatever. But sometimes, it's just not possible to initiate this. But if it is, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So you do your part, but then you leave the rest of it in God's hands. So you stop, and then you drop. And then number 3, you give. Give your heart and your gifts to God. After you've righted that relationship or done all that you can to, then come back and continue to press into God. There's a real connection between our relationship with other people and with God. And that's what Jesus is getting at here when he says, first go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. John says, how can you say you love God if you don't love your brother? Right? In other words, make your relationships with people right if you want to have good worship with God. You want to have a good walk with the Lord, don't leave those loose ends out there. If you know that you need to forgive someone or you need to initiate forgiveness, take care of that. You can't live an authentic, an authentic relationship with God and ignore people, right? We all get that. The 2 greatest commands: love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And they go together. And so that's why relationships with people and initiating forgiveness is so important. But once you've done that, then press into God. Say, Lord, I've got a clear conscience. Your worship will be sweeter. Your discipleship time will be better. If you hold on to that unforgiveness, you can come to 1,000 worship services, but you're never really going to experience closeness or a genuine peace with God, because there's that thing that is undealt with. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Paul says, in view of God's mercy, I love that because it all starts with realizing what God has done for you. That's what motivates us to want to love others. In view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing. The word holy is important there. We don't always, sometimes it just becomes a churchy word and we don't really think about what it means. In practical terms, holy just means as a person, I was an instrument of the world. I was an instrument of the flesh. My whole life was given for just living for self. Well, but when I accepted Christ, my whole life was set apart. That's what the word holy means. I've been set apart. Sanctified is another word for it, right? I've been set apart for God's purposes. So now my life and my abilities and my gifts and my resources, they're not just for me, they're for God. So that's why Paul says, offer your body as a living sacrifice, set apart for God, holy and pleasing to Him. This is your spiritual act of worship. Your life is worship. So do what you need to do, is the bottom line, to make relationships right. Last week, if somebody's hurt you, let it go, forgive them. Do those steps we talked about last week and forgive and let it go. And this week, man, sometimes it's harder. But spend some time in prayer. Lord, is there somebody that I've hurt? Help me to go make it right as far as it depends on me. And know that that'll make your relationship with Jesus whole and better when you do. So disciples respond by stopping and taking an inventory and acknowledging when they've hurt somebody, dropping whatever they need to drop so that they can immediately initiate this forgiveness, and then rededicating their life to giving all of themselves to God with a clear conscience and with peace.